Welcome to the CFDA e-commerce and logistics series in collaboration with Getting It Global. I'm Josh Halpern, your host, also known as the VanBassador, and I'm here to share insights from leading experts and brands in the global e-commerce and logistics space. In this series, we'll walk you through some of the key topics and trends that fashion brands should consider as they build their global expansion strategy. Let's check it out. Deanna Clark, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So Deanna, you're in the house again. You have, unlike others in the world, have actually taken a ride on the virtual VanBassador trip, and we are happy that you've actually chosen to come back.
Thanks. I love your van.
Deanna, we want to take a small amount of your time, as we know it is valuable, to understand what U.S. fashion brands should take into consideration when selling cross-border via e-commerce. So hit us up with it. What do we got?
Sure. It seems so easy. Oh, let's set up the site, let's start selling. But it's important to remember, first and foremost, you can't actually sell to everyone and you can't actually ship your goods out to everyone. So we've got something known as restricted parties. We have blocked people and blocked countries. So some obvious ones, North Korea or Iran. You can't send things over to them, right? But there may be people in Venezuela, there may be people in China, people meaning actual people or entities. And we're simply not allowed to ship whatever we want to whichever person, whether they can afford it or not, just anywhere we want to. So that's the first thing to keep in mind.
And what is it? What happens if you do?
Well, any number of things. So a shipment can be stopped on its way out of the country. A lot of people don't know this, but U.S. Customs, as the watchdog of our border, they're not only patrolling what's coming into the country, but they're also keeping an eye on what's going out and where is it going. So any shipment can have any number of flags come up. That could be one of them. A flag could be raised. Let's say you're using a 3PL, or courier company. They then hand it off to some other company to make a delivery into a place or to a person or entity that you're simply not allowed to by virtue of this export originating here in the U.S. You end up getting a little letter. Let's say the Office of Foreign Assets Control reaches out to you. Could be BIS or Bureau of Industry and Security. Both of them are overseeing exports and who we can and cannot do business with around the world. And they say, hey, listen, we saw that this happened, or we heard from such and such carrier you used that this happened. And we were wondering, when else has this happened? So now you've got this Pandora's box happening with your business. You have to find everything. There's deadlines. And guess what else? If they are doing an investigation, they've probably notified some other agencies that there's also an investigation going on, and they may begin their own investigation. So you really want to avoid that slippery slope and make sure you know that you can ship things to a particular person, entity, or location.
Now, this isn't just for small companies. Obviously, you deal with also large companies in the apparel space. And at what point do even large companies get into this hot water, and who's ultimately responsible?
It happens more often than you would think that it would. We helped navigate an OFAC, in particular an OFAC investigation with a Fortune 500 company. They had been responsible for shipping goods of, take any of the large retailers you might see, when you go to a shopping mall. And they were then facilitating the movement of those individual, the sweater or the jacket or what have you. And even with all of their resources, they lost track of packages, and they would because of the following, situation that happens. It can happen that even though my package might go out, let's say you send it out with DHL, and then DHL gets it over to maybe Geneva. And then in Geneva, it gets picked up by a Russian freight forwarder. And we have, prohibition on shipping things to the Crimea region of the Ukraine, which Russia considers to be its territory. But the U.S. has said, no, that's prohibited. Russia, we found them to be aggressive. We're not going to recognize that as Russian territory. Of course, for the Russian freight forwarder, no issue. And so because this is tracked by postal code, they have no issue. They go ahead and deliver it. Only it comes back to you because you're the one who initiated it. And not only you, but your carrier company is also in the mix. So, and it could very well be that they've ratted you out. It's, oh, well, you know what, I was doing it for such and such company. And then, oh, well, where else have you been sending your goods through that you had no knowledge of because you weren't paying attention to what you're doing? Because remember, anytime you're exporting something, anytime you're doing anything with our borders, the government considers the onus on you to be responsible for knowing what your legal requirements are. So there's an example.
What are some of the ramifications that happen? Is it due to increased?
Oh, well, look, of course there's penalties, so depending on what the value was, depending on how cooperative you were, there's any number of factors, of course, depending on the circumstances, how many shipments were ultimately involved. But they do have what's called mitigating factors. And so if we're able to show, even believe it or not, cooperating with an investigation can be used as a mitigating factor. So, we'll take a look. I mean, there's a list of mitigating factors, and then depending on what your circumstances are, even if you were inexperienced, and now you're saying, you know what, we're going to be on top of this. Of course, they want to know that you were on top of it in advance of you getting in trouble. But even in that analysis, then they'll say, okay, well, if you were complying with your written procedures, then send us a copy of those, which of course they actually ask for the moment they come to you about an investigation. And then they want to understand, were you following your own internal procedures?
Wow. So that's obviously really helpful information because companies can start laying the groundwork in terms of tracking and being really diligent about not only where it's going, but just what they're doing in their processes. Also, a great note around trade policy does impact our daily, right now, e-commerce and cross-border lives. Number 2, what can e-commerce companies do on their website to mitigate some of the risks?
Yeah, so another thing, and this is actually required under U.S. law, you've got to put some kind of disclaimer on your website explaining that to your customer, your foreign customer, that they will likely have to pay customs duties on this product. And when I say customs duties, I don't mean of the United States. I mean whatever the amount is going to be in their own country. Now remember, a customs duty, because I don't want to presume you already know this, but you can think of it like a sales tax. So just as you shop in most of the states here in the United States, we have a sales tax that we pay, on pretty much everything we buy. When a good is going to another country, their country requires that this type of a small tax is paid, and that tax is known as a customs duty. So the way that gets calculated, of course, is based on the declaration provided in relation to the product itself. So, depending on how it's been declared, which of course it needs to be declared truthfully, but depending on how it's declared will result in a classification number, this tariff classification number, and then using that number, they'll derive what amount needs to be paid in duties. So because that additional cost needs to be accounted for on your website, whether even if you're based in another country, but you're selling to people here in the United States, or rather you have a presence here, and can do your shipping, you need to have that on your website.
And that could be a form of a click box and somewhere, in general disclaimer or information.
That's right. So like you have it, so you go your checkout, and then just put there in very conspicuous lettering, this product or your shipment may be subject to customs duties payment in your country.
Okay. And you have to make sure that you've made every effort to make it visible. It can't just be hidden tiny. It has to be legitimately visible. I understand, right?
That's correct. Yes.
Number 3, you've alluded to this already, but talking about exporters need to comply as well. What is the threshold for when an exporter needs to comply? And could you get a little bit deeper into some of the cases?
Absolutely. So, again, if you're selling sort of one-off things, you really wouldn't think about it. But you need to understand, if you're an e-commerce seller, even if you're small, where your shipment exceeds $2,500 for any particular product, or if there's enough volume so that whatever number of products exceeds $2,500, then you're required to make a formal export declaration. Okay, so it's all electronic now. It's the Automated Export System, AES, and that declaration needs to be made for that particular product. You may have other line items in there that don't exceed $2,500. Those don't need to be declared for that reason. There may be other reasons to declare things within your shipment, but as it relates to fashion brands, there may not be too many things, because most items of apparel or textiles are not subject to what are known as export controls. But again, depending on who you're shipping it to, for what purpose, maybe.
So Deanna, to what degree does liability pass between a marketplace versus the actual merchant selling on the marketplace?
Believe it or not, where somebody, is in trouble, it can actually flow down the line. So let's say, I don't want to point anybody out in particular, but
Acme Marketplace.
yeah, you've got your online marketplace. They allow somebody, a seller, to sell, and that shipment gets into, let's continuing down with the Crimea region of the Ukraine. Let's say shipment gets into there. That marketplace can now be in trouble, and we've seen that happen, and I mean to the tune of millions of dollars in trouble for permitting sales, to occur, and then of course the shipment ensues to complete the act, because there's the sale, but then there's the physical act of it getting there. And so where that platform is facilitating what amounts to breaking U.S. law, they too can be held accountable, held liable.
Thanks, Deanna. We've got one more bonus topic to talk about. What is wildlife, and as it's considered in terms of apparel and accessories and the cross-border space?
In terms of wildlife, it's maybe not as obvious as you would think it is. I mean, of course, there's the overtly, oh, this is a fur. Oh, this is a snakeskin. Oh, that's python. Got it. It's clear that that's python. But what about feathers on earrings? What about, an inexpensive watch that has, mother of pearl on the dial? Guess what? All of these things, they're considered wildlife, and some, including the mother of pearl dial, because it's a particular kind of a shell, is subject to obtaining a fish and wildlife license in advance of it being exported or imported.
So obviously there are brands that they're not even aware perhaps that there was a trim put on that actually triggers being wildlife, whereas otherwise it was pretty much synthetic, and that could cause issues, not only changing your HS code, but your compliance and a number of issues.
No, absolutely. And here's the thing, and and I've told clients this too, you need to have your different departments talking to one another. And if you happen to be a one-person show, you need to put on your proverbial hats and speak to yourselves as well, because in the eyes of the government, it's your product. How did you not know what was on it? And certainly with the bigger companies, the thought is you have a team of people overseeing your customs compliant, or, if you're exporting, then in relation to your exports. And where you have anything that is made of animal or seashell or certain plants even, you need to have certain processes in place to catch what those things are, and that you go and apply for your license for them.
Just so that the people at home can understand and know, who is Deanna Clark? I find every time I talk to you, you've got amazing sense of fashion, at least from what I can see. Saturday night, what are your brand go-tos? What are you wearing?
Yeah, so I'll tell you, I do prefer more of an understated look. I have a relatively modest looking purse. It's a Bottega Veneta. You've got to know the brand to know what it is. Otherwise, it's not screaming, hey, look at me. I have a Hugo Boss, skirt on today, Ralph Lauren scarf. Very sort of, not particularly, I think, noticeable, but things that I feel good wearing.
Okay, but money's no object. You go out Saturday night. You're going to go to Fashion Week, CFDA Fashion Week. What are you wearing? By the way, everybody, Deanna's so good at under pressure. I did not tell her I was going to ask her any of these questions, but thank you for playing with me.
No, absolutely. Listen, if I had an ability to have a nice Valentino dress to wear, that would make me very happy.
Okay, so if any of you listening there, including Valentino, let's say, felt this was helpful, if you look at the hourly savings you had on legal fees, consider sending Deanna a present. And with that, thanks for joining us again, Deanna, and we will see you out there on the road soon.
Sounds good. See you on the road, Josh.